Your fiancé put something in your son's food!
Your fiancé put something in your son's food. The scream ripped through the luxury restaurant like a gunshot. 7-year-old John Dlamini slid from his chair, his small body shaking violently as plates shattered on the floor. His eyes rolled back. His lips turned pale. Time froze. Millionaire Eric Dlamini dropped to his knees, lifting his son with trembling hands, shouting his name again and again. No answer. Around them, people gasped. Someone cried. Someone stepped back in fear. And there she was, Sharon Kiptoo, Eric's fiancée, standing stiff beside the table, her face drained of color, her hands shaking not with shock but with something darker. Eric slowly looked up at her. In that moment, love, trust, and a child's life hung by a single breath. Before we begin this story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this. Before the screams, before the hospital lights, before fear carved deep lines into his face, Eric Dlamini had a life many people admired from a distance. He was the kind of man newspapers loved to talk about, self-made, disciplined, quietly powerful. By 42, Eric owned one of the fastest-growing logistics companies in southern Africa, moving goods across borders most people only saw on maps. His name carried weight in boardrooms from Johannesburg to Nairobi, but none of that mattered when he went home. At home, Eric was not a millionaire. He was just a father. Every morning he woke before sunrise, not because of meetings, but because John liked his eggs cooked a certain way, soft, never dry. Eric tied his son's school tie himself, even when assistants waited outside with schedules and reminders. "You don't have to do everything alone, Dad," John once said, his small voice serious beyond his years. Eric smiled then, but his chest tightened. Because once, he hadn't been alone. John's mother, Lindawe, had been the calm in Eric's restless ambition. She believed in him when his business was nothing more than a borrowed truck and unpaid fuel bills. She laughed easily. She loved deeply. And one rainy night 5 years earlier, she never came home. The accident was sudden, brutal, a drunk driver. One phone call that split Eric's life into before and after. After the funeral, Eric learned how loud silence could be. John was only 2 then. Too young to understand death, but old enough to feel absence. He cried for his mother in his sleep for months. Eric would sit on the edge of the bed holding that small, shaking body, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep. "I'm here. I won't leave you." From that moment on, Eric poured everything into his son. Love, protection, control. Maybe too much of it. People noticed. At family gatherings, whispers followed him. A man like Eric shouldn't be alone forever. A boy needs a mother. John needs a woman in the house. Even Mama Zanali Dlamini, Eric's own mother, gentle but firm, spoke carefully one evening. "My son," she said, stirring tea slowly. "Grief should not turn into a prison." Eric said nothing. He stared at his hands instead. He wasn't against love. He just didn't trust it anymore. That was when Sharon Kiptoo entered his life. They met at a charity gala in Nairobi, one of those events Eric attended out of obligation, not interest. Sharon was elegant without trying too hard. She spoke intelligently about business, but also about books, about travel, about faith. Most importantly, she listened. When Eric mentioned John, her eyes softened. "I adore children," she said gently. "They're honest. They don't pretend." Eric noticed how she didn't ask about his money first, how she laughed easily, how she didn't push, or so he thought. Their relationship moved slowly at first. Dinners, long conversations, careful steps. Sharon never demanded immediate access to John. She waited. That patience impressed Eric. The first time John met her, Eric watched closely. Sharon knelt to John's height, smiling. "Your dad talks about you all the time," she said. John smiled politely. He was a quiet child, observant. He studied her face longer than most kids would. "You smell nice," he said honestly. Sharon laughed. Eric relaxed. For a while, Sharon began spending more time at the house. She helped with homework. She cooked sometimes, though she always insisted the staff supervise. She bought John gifts, toys, books, new shoes. In front of Eric, she was affectionate, encouraging, but children feel things adults ignore. John noticed how her smile changed when Eric hugged him too long, how her voice sharpened when Eric canceled plans because John had a school event, how she corrected John quickly but rarely praised him. Once when Eric wasn't around, Sharon sighed and said almost to herself, "You're very attached to your father." John didn't understand why that sentence made his stomach hurt. One night he asked quietly, Dad, does Sharon like me? Eric froze. Why would you ask that? John shrugged. I don't know. She just looks sad sometimes when you play with me. Eric forced a smile, brushed his son's hair. She's just adjusting. Adults need time. But doubt crept in. Eric pushed it away. He wanted this to work, for John, for himself, for the version of life that looked whole again. When he proposed to Sharon, he did it privately, simply. No cameras, no grand speech. She cried. She said yes. John clapped politely when he heard the news, but that night alone in bed, he hugged his pillow tighter than usual. Eric didn't see that. He was too busy believing he had finally rebuilt what was broken. He didn't know that jealousy once planted grows silently. And sometimes, it grows toward the most innocent heart in the room. If Eric Dlamini had learned anything from building his company, it was that problems rarely announced themselves loudly. They arrived quietly, smiling. After the engagement, Sharon Kiptoo seemed to change, but only just enough that it could still be denied. To the outside world, she was the perfect future wife, elegant at events, supportive during interviews, always standing half a step behind Eric, her hand resting lightly on his arm as if saying, "This man is mine," without speaking a word. At home, she became more involved, more present, more watchful. She insisted on joining Eric and John for breakfast every morning. At first, it felt harmless. You shouldn't rush off without eating, she told Eric, pouring coffee with a practiced smile. And John needs to see us as a family. Eric liked that word, family. John sat quietly at the table, swinging his legs beneath the chair. Sharon often corrected the way he held his spoon, the way he sat, the way he spoke. Say please properly, John. Sit up straight. Don't interrupt adults. None of it sounded cruel, but none of it sounded kind either. Eric noticed once or twice, but brushed it aside. Discipline was normal, he told himself, maybe even good. What he didn't see were the moments when he wasn't around. The way Sharon's smile faded the second Eric left the room. The way her eyes followed John, not warmly but cautiously, like one might watch a rival. One afternoon, John came home early from school with a mild fever. Eric was stuck in traffic, phone pressed to his ear, frustration rising. Sharon, please stay with him, he said. I'll be there as soon as I can. Of course, she replied smoothly. When Eric arrived, he found John asleep on the couch, a blanket tucked neatly around him. Sharon sat nearby, scrolling through her phone. He didn't eat much, she said casually. I think he exaggerates sometimes. Eric frowned slightly but said nothing. He kissed John's forehead and carried him upstairs. That night, as Eric worked late in his study, John stood hesitantly at the door. Dad? Eric looked up immediately. What's wrong, son, John? Hesitated. He twisted the hem of his pajama shirt, eyes fixed on the floor. Sharon said, she said I should stop pretending to be sick, that you have important work. Eric's chest tightened. What exactly did she say? John shrugged again. She said big men get tired when children cause problems. Silence filled the room. Eric closed his laptop slowly. She shouldn't have said that, he said carefully. You didn't do anything wrong. John nodded, but the reassurance didn't quite reach his eyes. I miss Mom, he whispered. That broke Eric more than anything else. He pulled John into his arms, holding him tightly. I know, he said. I miss her too. Downstairs, Sharon watched them from the bottom of the staircase, unseen. Her jaw tightened. She told herself she was being irrational. She told herself she loved Eric. She told herself she was just afraid of being second place. But fear, when fed daily, turns into resentment, and resentment looks for release. A week later, Mama Eric Dlamini came to visit. The older woman arrived quietly, as she always did, her eyes sharp despite her gentle tone. She hugged John tightly, laughing as he told her about school. She greeted Sharon politely, but without warmth. That didn't go unnoticed. At lunch, Mama Zanelli watched closely. She noticed how Sharon spoke about John rather than to him, how she corrected him without touching him, how she rarely smiled when Eric wasn't watching. Later, while Eric stepped out to take a call, Mama Zanelli leaned closer to Sharon. My dear, she said softly, a child who has lost his mother needs patience, not competition. Sharon stiffened. I would never compete with a child, she replied, her voice controlled. Mama Zanelli held her gaze. Good, she said. Then we understand each other. That evening, after Mama Zanelli left, Sharon confronted Eric. Your mother doesn't like me, she said abruptly. Eric sighed. She's cautious. She's protective. So am I. Sharon snapped. But it seems I'm the only one expected to adjust. Eric rubbed his temples. No one is attacking you, Sharon. Her eyes filled with tears instantly. I feel invisible sometimes, she said softly. You and John already have everything. Where do I fit? Eric's heart softened. He moved closer, taking her hands. This is new for all of us, he said. We just need time. Sharon nodded, leaning into his chest, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Time won't fix this, she thought. He will always choose the boy. The final straw came quietly. Eric announced that he was postponing the wedding date. Just a little, he explained gently. John needs more stability first. I don't want him feeling pushed aside. Sharon smiled tightly. Of course, she said. I understand. But that night alone in the guest room she had chosen for herself. Sharon stared at her reflection. She saw a woman who had done everything right, loved the right man, waited patiently, played her role, and still, a child stood between her and the life she wanted. Her phone buzzed. A message from a friend. Kids ruin relationships, it read, especially when they're not yours. Sharon stared at the screen for a long time, then she typed back nothing. The next evening, Eric suggested a dinner out. Let's celebrate us, he said. No stress, just family. Sharon smiled again, sweetly, calmly. Yes, she said, let's do that. John looked up from his book. Where are we going? A nice restaurant. Sharon answered before Eric could speak. You'll love it. John smiled faintly. He had no idea that this dinner, this simple, ordinary dinner, was about to change everything. The restaurant was one of those places where everything looked perfect on the surface. Soft golden lights hung from the ceiling, reflecting off polished marble floors. A pianist played gently in the corner, the kind of music meant to calm rich minds after long days of power and pressure. Waiters moved with trained precision, their smiles professional, their steps silent. Eric Dlamini chose the place carefully. It wasn't about showing off. He could afford far more extravagant venues. This was about comfort, about creating a moment that felt warm and safe for John especially. Dad. This place smells nice, John said, as they walked in, holding Eric's hand tightly. Eric smiled. That's because the food here is very good. Sharon Kiptu walked slightly ahead of them, her heels clicking softly against the floor. She wore a cream-colored dress, elegant and simple, her hair pulled back neatly. To anyone watching, they looked like the picture of a happy future family. A hostess led them to a quiet table near the window. As they sat down, Eric noticed John scanning the room. You okay? Eric asked. John nodded. Yes, but his voice was small. Moments later, their waitress approached. Good evening, she said warmly. My name is Naomi Afolayan. I'll be taking care of you tonight. Naomi was in her late 20s, her face calm but attentive, the kind of person who noticed details without seeming intrusive. Years of working in service had taught her how to read people, not just what they ordered, but how they carried themselves. Eric smiled politely. Thank you. Sharon returned the smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. As Naomi handed them menus, she noticed how Sharon's gaze lingered on John. Not with affection, with calculation. Naomi had seen many families, loving ones, broken ones, tense ones pretending to be fine. Something about this table made her pause. They ordered quickly. John asked for grilled chicken with mashed potatoes, simple, safe. Eric ordered fish. Sharon chose pasta. While waiting, Eric leaned back slightly, relaxing for the first time all day. So he said, smiling at Sharon, no phones tonight, just us. Of course, Sharon replied smoothly, placing her phone face down on the table. John swung his legs again. Dad, can we get dessert? Eric laughed. Let's see how you finish your food first. John grinned. Naomi returned with bread and water. As she placed the basket down, she noticed Sharon's hand move toward John's plate, even though the food hadn't arrived yet. It was subtle, too subtle to accuse, but enough to register. Naomi straightened slowly, her eyes flicking briefly to Sharon's face. Sharon smiled back, calm and composed. Minutes later, the meals arrived. Naomi placed John's plate directly in front of him. Careful, it's hot, she said gently. John nodded. Thank you. Eric watched his son closely as always. Sharon reached for her wine, taking a small sip. As Naomi stepped back, she paused. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Sharon lean slightly forward. Sharon's hand moved toward the small handbag resting on the chair beside her. Her fingers disappeared inside it for just a moment. Then, just as casually, Sharon's hand hovered over John's plate. Naomi's heart skipped. She couldn't see exactly what Sharon did, but she saw the motion, the intent, the timing. Eric was looking down at his phone responding to a message from his assistant. John was distracted adjusting his napkin. Naomi opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. Maybe I'm mistaken, she told herself. Don't jump to conclusions. Sharon leaned back, her posture relaxed again. John picked up his fork. Naomi's stomach tightened. She stayed close, pretending to tidy the table next to them. She watched as John took his first bite, then another. Everything seemed normal for about 30 seconds. Then John's face changed. He frowned, placing his fork down. "Dad," he said quietly. Eric looked up immediately. "What is it? My stomach hurts." Sharon's head turned sharply. "You probably ate too fast," she said lightly. "Slow down." John nodded, but his face grew pale. Naomi felt a cold wave rush through her body. John pressed his hand to his abdomen. "Dad, it really hurts." Eric pushed his chair back. Okay, maybe we should—" John suddenly gagged. The fork clattered to the plate. His chair scraped loudly against the floor as his body stiffened. His legs kicked once, then twice. "John!" Eric shouted. The boy slid sideways, falling from the chair, his small body hitting the floor with a sickening thud. The restaurant froze. Naomi reacted before she could think. She rushed forward, kneeling beside John. "Sir," she cried, "he's not okay." Eric dropped to his knees, lifting John's head into his arms. "John, look at me," he shouted. "Breathe, son. Please." John's eyes rolled back. Foam gathered at the corner of his mouth. People gasped. Chairs scraped back. Someone screamed. Sharon stood abruptly, her face drained of color. "Oh my God," she whispered. "What's happening?" Naomi's heart pounded violently. She looked at John, then at the plate, then at Sharon. Everything connected in one terrifying instant. Before fear could silence her, Naomi stood up and screamed, her voice raw, shaking, unstoppable. "Your fiancé put something in your son's food." The words echoed through the restaurant. A stunned silence followed. Eric looked up slowly, disbelief flooding his eyes. "What did you say?" he demanded. Sharon staggered back a step. "That's a lie," she cried. "How dare you?" Naomi's hands trembled, but her eyes stayed locked on Eric. "I saw her," she said, her voice breaking but firm. "I saw her reach into her bag. I saw her hand over the boy's plate." Eric's world collapsed inward. He looked at Sharon, at the plate, at his son convulsing in his arms. "Sharon," he whispered, "tell me she's lying." Sharon's lips parted, but no words came out. In that moment, sirens wailed outside. Someone had called for help. Eric gathered John in his arms, standing up with a strength born of terror. "Move," he shouted. "Please, move." As he rushed toward the exit, Naomi stood frozen, her heart pounding painfully. She knew what she had just done. She had accused a powerful man's fiancé in public. She had risked her job, her safety, her future. But as she watched Eric disappear into the night with his son, Naomi knew one thing with terrifying clarity. Whatever was in that food, if she had stayed silent, a child might have died. The ambulance doors slammed shut with a metallic echo that seemed to slice through Eric Dlamini's chest. Inside the moving vehicle, everything blurred into harsh white light and frantic motion. A paramedic pressed oxygen to John's face, while another monitored his vitals, calling out numbers that sounded wrong. Too low, too fast, too unstable. Eric sat rigid on the narrow bench, his suit stained with food and saliva, his arms wrapped tightly around his son as if letting go would mean losing him forever. "Stay with me, John," he whispered again and again. "Daddy's here. Please stay." John's small body jerked violently, then went frighteningly still. "Sir, we need you to step back," the paramedic said firmly. Eric obeyed, hands trembling as he released his grip. His mind screamed with images: John learning to ride a bike, John laughing at bedtime stories, John's tiny hand slipping into his every morning. Not like this, please, not like this. Outside, the city lights streaked past, uncaring. Sharon Kiptu arrived at the hospital 10 minutes later, escorted by police officers who had followed the ambulance from the restaurant. Her face was pale, her movements stiff, as if she were walking through a dream she didn't recognize. In the emergency room, chaos ruled. Doctors shouted instructions. Nurses rushed equipment in and out. The smell of antiseptic burned the air. Dr. Thabo Mokoena emerged moments later, his expression serious but controlled. "He's having a severe reaction," the doctor said. "Possible poisoning. We're doing everything we can." Eric's knees buckled. He grabbed the edge of a chair to steady himself. "Poison," he repeated hoarsely. "You're sure? We won't know for certain until tests come back." Dr. Mokoena replied, "But the symptoms are consistent." Eric's mind snapped back to the restaurant. Naomi's scream, Sharon's silence. He turned slowly and saw Sharon standing a few feet away, her arms wrapped around herself. "What did you do?" he asked quietly. Sharon flinched. "Eric, I swear I don't know what that girl was talking about." Her voice shook, but something about it felt rehearsed. "You saw him collapse," she continued. "Why would I hurt your son?" Eric stared at her. He searched her face for something familiar, something safe. He found nothing. Police officers approached gently. "Mr. Dlamini once said we need to ask a few questions." Eric nodded numbly. As he spoke to them, Sharon stood aside, watching. Her mind raced, not with concern but calculation. "Stay calm," she told herself. "They have no proof." Minutes later, another officer approached Sharon. "Ma'am, we'll need you to come with us for questioning." Sharon's eyes widened. "Questioning? I haven't done anything. It's routine," the officer said. Eric watched as they led her away down the corridor. For the first time since meeting her, Sharon did not look back at him. Hours passed like years. Eric sat in the waiting room, head buried in his hands, unable to pray, unable to think. He replayed every moment, every warning he had ignored. "Dad, does Sharon like me?" Guilt crushed him. Naomi Afolayan arrived quietly, escorted by the restaurant manager. She looked shaken, her eyes red from crying. "I'm so sorry," she whispered when she saw Eric. "I didn't know what else to do." Eric stood slowly. For a moment, Naomi feared he might shout at her, blame her, accuse her. Instead, Eric bowed his head. "Thank you," he said simply. "If you hadn't spoken, I don't know." Naomi's breath hitched. "I was scared. I still am." Eric met her eyes. "You did the right thing." That was when Dr. Mokoena returned. "The substance wasn't lethal in the dose administered," he said carefully. "But it was dangerous. Extremely. Another few minutes and we might be having a very different conversation." Eric's heart slammed painfully against his ribs. "Can I see him?" Dr. Mokoena nodded. Briefly. Eric entered the room slowly. John lay pale against the white sheets, small tubes attached to his arm. His chest rose and fell weakly. Eric knelt beside the bed, his voice breaking. "I failed you," he whispered. "I let the wrong person too close." John stirred faintly, his fingers curling around Eric's. "Dad," he murmured. Eric choked back a sob. "I'm here." Outside the room, Sharon sat alone in an interrogation room, her polished image cracking. The questions came steadily. "What were you doing with the child's food? Did you bring anything with you to the table? Why did the waitress accuse you?" Sharon denied everything. She cried. She claimed jealousy from the staff. She painted herself as a victim. But then, they showed her the footage, camera angle from above, grainy but clear enough. Her hand, her bag, the plate. Silence filled the room. Sharon's shoulders sagged. "I didn't mean to kill him," she whispered. The officer leaned forward. "But you meant to hurt him?" Sharon's face twisted, not in remorse but frustration. "He was always there," she said bitterly. "Always between us. I just wanted Eric to see me." Back in the hospital corridor, Eric sat beside Naomi and Mama Zanelli, who had arrived silently, her eyes heavy with wisdom and sorrow. "A woman who competes with a child," Mama Zanelli said softly, "has already lost her way." Eric nodded slowly, tears streaming down his face. That night, as dawn crept into the sky, Eric held his son's hand and made a promise not out loud but deep in his soul. Never again would he ignore his child's fear. Never again would love come before safety, and never again would he mistake silence for peace, because sometimes the loudest truth comes from the bravest scream. Morning light crept through the narrow hospital windows, thin and unforgiving. It painted everything in pale gold walls, floors faces, but it did nothing to soften the weight sitting on Eric Dlamini's chest. He had not slept. Every time his eyes closed, he saw John falling, heard Naomi's scream, felt the hollow drop in his stomach when Sharon failed to deny it. John lay quietly now, stabilized but weak. Machines hummed softly around him, a fragile rhythm of life that Eric counted with each breath. He sat beside the bed, fingers wrapped around his son's small hand, afraid to let go even for a moment. Dr. Thabo Mokoena entered with a clipboard, his expression calm but serious. "He's responding well," the doctor said. "The worst is behind us, but the substance caused significant stress to his system. He'll need observation." Eric nodded, swallowing hard. "What was it?" Dr. Mokoena hesitated. "A bitter compound. Not meant for food, not something a child should ever ingest." The implication landed like a blow. Eric exhaled shakily. Thank you, doctor. After the doctor left, Mama Eric Dlamini stepped closer to the bed. She placed a hand on Eric's shoulder, firm and grounding. You were deceived, she said quietly. Do not carry all the blame alone. Eric shook his head. I brought her into our home. Mama Zanelli's eyes softened, and when you saw danger, you stood up. That is what matters now. In the hallway, Naomi Afolayan sat alone on a plastic chair, hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had refused to go home. Fear sat with her heavy and relentless. She replayed the moment again and again, the movement of Sharon's hand, the split second when doubt nearly won. What if I had been wrong? What if my voice had destroyed an innocent woman? A nurse passed by and offered a kind smile. Naomi forced one back, but her eyes burned. Eric stepped out of John's room and saw her. He walked over slowly. You don't have to stay, he said gently. Naomi stood up immediately. I want to, she replied. I need to know he's okay. Eric nodded. He will be, because of you. Naomi's breath caught. I was afraid. So was I, Eric said. But fear didn't stop you. For the first time since the night before, Naomi felt a small release in her chest. Across the hospital, Inspector Kojo Mensah reviewed the evidence with his team. The footage was clear enough to establish intent. Sharon's statement, now fragmented and inconsistent, only tightened the case around her. She claims she didn't mean to kill the child, an officer said. Kojo nodded. Intent to harm a minor is enough. Sharon Kiptu sat in a holding room. Her makeup smudged, her confidence evaporated. The walls felt too close, the silence too loud. She stared at her hands. How did it come to this, she wondered. In her mind, she was not a villain. She was a woman who loved a man too deeply, a woman tired of being second. She had told herself the substance would only make John sick, just enough to force Eric's attention back to her. She had not thought about the weight of a child's body on the floor, the sound of convulsions, the look in Eric's eyes. Now those images chased her relentlessly. A knock sounded. Inspector Kojo entered. Ms. Kiptu, you are being charged. Her shoulders slumped. Can I speak to Eric? She asked quietly. Kojo paused. That's not advisable. Please, Sharon whispered. I need him to understand. Back in the corridor, Eric received the request. He stared at the message on the officer's phone for a long time. Do you want to see her? Mama Zanelli asked. Eric closed his eyes. Yes, they met in a small, sterile room. Sharon stood when he entered, her eyes filling with tears. Eric, she said softly. He didn't sit. He didn't move closer. Why, he asked. One word, heavy as a stone. Sharon's voice trembled. I was afraid of losing you. You chose to hurt my child, Eric replied, his voice dangerously calm. I didn't want to hurt him badly, she insisted. I just wanted you to see me. Eric shook his head slowly. Love doesn't demand a child's pain. Silence stretched between them. I trusted you, he continued. I let you into my son's life. Sharon sobbed openly now. I'm sorry. Eric turned away. I forgive you, he said quietly, but forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. He left without looking back. When he returned to John's room, the boy was awake. Dad, John whispered. Eric rushed to the bedside. I'm here. John frowned slightly. Is Sharon mad at me? Eric's heart shattered. No, he said firmly. None of this is your fault, ever. John nodded, exhausted. I was scared. I know, Eric whispered. I should have listened sooner. John squeezed his hand weakly. Outside, dawn fully claimed the sky. The night's chaos gave way to a fragile calm. Eric stood by the window later, watching the city wake up. Cars moved. People hurried to work. Life continued as it always did, indifferent to private tragedies. But something inside Eric had changed permanently. He had learned that danger didn't always come wearing anger. Sometimes it came smiling, waiting patiently for trust. And as he looked back at his son sleeping peacefully, Eric knew one thing with absolute certainty. From this day forward, protection would not be passive. Love would not be blind. It would be awake. The hospital settled into an uneasy rhythm by late morning. Footsteps echoed less frequently in the corridor. Voices dropped to whispers. The storm had passed, but its damage lingered in every corner. In tired eyes, in trembling hands, in the quiet hum of machines keeping a child alive. Eric Dlamini sat beside John's bed, watching his son sleep. Each breath John took felt like a small victory. Eric counted them without realizing it, afraid that if he stopped, something might slip away again. When Inspector Kojo Mensah returned, Eric knew the calm would not last. Mr. Dlamini, Kojo said gently, "We need to go over a few details." Eric nodded. "Anything." They stepped into a small consultation room. The door closed softly behind them, sealing Eric inside a reality he had never imagined for himself. "We've confirmed the substance," Kojo began. "It wasn't food grade. It was brought from outside." Eric's jaw tightened. "So, it wasn't an accident?" "No," Kojo replied. "And the footage supports that." Eric leaned back against the wall, staring at the ceiling. He felt anger rising hot, sharp, but beneath it was something worse. Shame. "I ignored signs," he said quietly. "People warned me. My son warned me." Kojo nodded. "Love can cloud judgment." Eric let out a bitter laugh. This wasn't love. Meanwhile, down the hall, Naomi Afolayan stood alone at the water dispenser, staring at her reflection in the scratched metal surface. She barely recognized herself. The confident waitress who moved through dining rooms with practiced ease had been replaced by someone fragile, exposed. She had given her statement twice already. Each time she felt like she was reliving the moment Sharon's hand the plate, the split second when she chose to speak. A voice interrupted her thoughts. "You did a brave thing." Naomi turned. Mama Zanelli stood beside her, holding a small paper cup of tea. "I almost didn't," Naomi admitted. "I was scared." Mama Zanelli smiled sadly. "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting despite it." Naomi took the tea with both hands. "What if people think I did it for attention?" "They won't," Mama Zanelli said firmly. "And even if they did, the truth still matters." At that moment, a nurse hurried toward them. "Ms. Afolayan," she said, "the police would like to speak with you again." Naomi's heart sank, but she nodded and followed. Back in the consultation room, Eric finished answering questions. Kojo closed his notebook. "There's one more thing," the inspector said. "We'll need your cooperation if this goes to court." Eric straightened. "You'll have it." Kojo hesitated. "This will be public." Eric didn't flinch. Let it be. What terrified him more than headlines was the thought of silence, of this happening again to another child, another family. When Eric returned to John's room, he found his son awake, staring at the ceiling. "Dad," John said softly. "Am I in trouble?" Eric's heart clenched. "No," he said immediately, sitting beside the bed. "You are safe. That's all that matters." John blinked. "Will Sharon come back?" Eric took a breath. "No." John was quiet for a moment. "She didn't like me." Eric swallowed. "She was confused, but that was never your fault." John turned his head slowly. "I tried to be good." Eric wrapped his arms around him carefully, mindful of the tubes. "You were perfect." Outside the room, Naomi watched through the glass, tears blurring her vision. She had grown up without much family. Watching a father protect his child so fiercely stirred something deep inside her. Later that afternoon, Sharon Kiptu was formally transferred to a detention facility pending charges. As she was escorted past the hospital entrance, she caught sight of Eric through the glass. For a brief second, their eyes met. Eric didn't look away. Sharon did. News spread quickly. By evening, Eric's phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from business partners, friends, relatives, journalists. He ignored them all. Only one call mattered. Mama Zanelli answered it quietly, then handed the phone to Eric. "It's your sister," she said. Eric hesitated before taking it. "I heard," his sister said softly. "Is John okay?" Eric closed his eyes. "He will be." A pause. "I'm coming." After the call, Eric felt something shift. The isolation he had built around himself for years began to crack. Maybe that was part of the lesson too, that strength wasn't meant to be carried alone. That night, as John slept peacefully, Eric stepped outside to the hospital courtyard. Naomi sat on a bench, arms wrapped around herself. "You should go home," Eric said gently. Naomi shook her head. "Not yet." Eric sat beside her. "I owe you more than I can say," he began. Naomi looked down. "I didn't do it for thanks. I know," Eric said. "That's why it matters." They sat in silence for a while, listening to distant city sounds. "I lost my wife," Eric said suddenly, "and I thought I understood loss. But almost losing my son." His voice broke. "That fear rewrites you." Naomi nodded. "I grew up watching my mother endure things silently. I promised myself I wouldn't." Eric turned to her. "You kept that promise." Inside, Mama Zanelli watched them through the window. She didn't smile, but there was approval in her eyes. The night passed without incident. For the first time since the restaurant, Eric allowed himself to sleep. Not deeply, not peacefully, but enough. And as dawn approached again, a new chapter quietly began, not of wealth or status, but of accountability, healing, and voices that refused to stay silent. Because the truth had been spoken, and once spoken it could no longer be buried. By the third day, the hospital no longer felt like a battlefield, but it still felt like a place where truth was being tested. John's color had returned slowly, as if life itself were tiptoeing back into his small body. He could sit up now. He could sip warm broth. He could even smile, though it faded quickly when exhaustion took over. Eric Dlamini stayed close, working remotely, refusing every meeting that required him to leave the building. For the first time in years, his company survived without him being physically present, and the realization unsettled him. I gave too much to the wrong things, he thought. That morning, Inspector Kojo Mensah requested a formal follow-up interview with Naomi Afolayan. Naomi's stomach knotted as she sat in the small office near the nurse's station. Her hands rested neatly on her lap, but they trembled despite her effort to stay calm. She had told the truth already, twice. Still, the weight of authority pressed heavily on her chest. Kojo entered with another officer and a thin file. Ms. Afolayan, Kojo began, "This is routine. We need a detailed chronological account." Naomi nodded. "I understand." She spoke slowly, choosing her words carefully. She described the evening again, how she noticed Sharon's attention on John, how she saw the movement toward the bag, the hand hovering over the plate. "I didn't see the substance clearly," Naomi admitted, "but I saw the action and the timing." "Why didn't you intervene immediately?" the second officer asked. Naomi hesitated, then answered honestly, "Because I doubted myself, and because accusing a guest like that could end my job." Kojo leaned back slightly. "But you spoke when the child collapsed." "Yes," Naomi said. Her voice wavered, because at that point doubt no longer mattered. The officers exchanged a glance. "Thank you," Kojo said. "That will be all for now." When Naomi stepped back into the hallway, she found Eric waiting. "I wanted to make sure you were okay," he said. Naomi forced a smile. "I think I will be." Eric nodded. "If anyone gives you trouble legally or otherwise, you tell me." Naomi looked at him surprised. "You don't owe me that." Eric met her gaze steadily. "I owe my son his life, and you're part of that." Inside John's room, Mama Zanelli sat beside the bed peeling an orange slowly. Grandma John asked, "Why did Sharon do that?" Mama Zanelli paused. She chose her words with care. "Sometimes," she said gently, "people let jealousy speak louder than love." John frowned. "I didn't do anything to her," no, Mama Zanelli said firmly, "and that is the most important thing for you to remember." Eric entered quietly, listening. He felt both gratitude and grief for the wisdom passed on and for the innocence that had been shaken. That afternoon, the restaurant management released an internal statement. They acknowledged Naomi's actions publicly, praised her courage, and confirmed full cooperation with authorities. Still, not everyone believed her. Online comments questioned her motives. Some accused her of seeking attention. Others claimed she had misunderstood. Naomi saw none of it. Eric made sure of that. Woman, her phone buzzed with messages from co-workers, some supportive, some fearful. Eric arranged for temporary accommodation closer to the hospital. "You shouldn't go back to your apartment right now," he said. "People talk, people speculate." Naomi hesitated. "I don't want special treatment." "This isn't that," Eric replied. "It's protection." Naomi accepted quietly. That night, as rain fell softly outside the windows, Eric sat alone in the hospital chapel. He wasn't a religious man, not anymore, but something drew him there. He bowed his head not in prayer, but in reflection. "I almost lost him," he thought, "because I was desperate for a picture of normal." He remembered Sharon's words, "I just wanted you to see me." The realization hurt. He had been so focused on filling a gap that he had failed to guard what mattered most. Later, Dr. Thabo Mokoena met with Eric privately. "John can likely be discharged in 2 days," the doctor said. "Physically, he's recovering well." Eric exhaled deeply. And mentally, Dr. Mokoena hesitated. "Trauma doesn't follow a schedule. Watch him. Listen to him." Eric nodded. "I will." That evening, Eric sat by John's bed reading softly. "Dad." John said suddenly, "Can Naomi visit again?" Eric smiled gently. "Of course. Why?" "She talks to me like Mom used to," John said. "Like I'm important." Eric's throat tightened. "You are important." Naomi visited the next morning. John smiled when he saw her. "You saved me," he said simply. Naomi blinked back tears. I just told the truth. John nodded seriously. That's saving. Eric watched the exchange quietly. He felt something unfamiliar, respect layered with gratitude, and beneath it, a new awareness. Naomi wasn't loud. She wasn't dramatic. She didn't demand space in their lives. She simply showed up when it mattered. Outside, Inspector Kojo finalized paperwork. Charges were officially filed. The case would proceed. Sharon Kiptu's legal team requested bail. The judge denied it. The news reached Eric that night. He felt no satisfaction, no relief, only a heavy stillness. Mama Zanelli noticed. You expected closure, she said gently. But justice is not closure. Healing is. Eric nodded slowly. As John drifted into sleep, Eric held his hand and made another promise, this one aloud. I will listen, he whispered, even when it's uncomfortable, because silence had nearly cost him everything. And voices, quiet, brave voices like Naomi's, had given him his son back. When John was finally discharged, the hospital doors didn't feel like freedom. They felt like responsibility. Eric Dlamini walked slowly beside his son, one hand steadying the wheelchair, the other gripping a bag of medications and instructions. The sunlight outside was bright, too bright, almost mocking after days under fluorescent lights. John squinted. Dad, can we go home? Eric hesitated. Home. The word carried memories that now felt unsafe. The house had been a place of routine and comfort, but it had also been the stage where danger slipped in unnoticed. We'll go somewhere safe, Eric said carefully. Somewhere quiet. Mama Zanelli nodded in approval. They drove to a smaller house Eric owned on the edge of the city, a place he used only when he needed distance. It was modest by his standards, low walls, wide windows, a garden that hadn't been manicured to perfection. It felt human. Naomi Afolayan arrived later that afternoon, carrying a small bag of fruit and a hesitant smile. I didn't want to intrude, she said. You're not, Eric replied. You're welcome. John beamed when he saw her. You came? Naomi laughed softly. I said I would. They sat in the living room, sunlight pooling on the floor. For the first time in days, John laughed, really laughed, when Naomi told a silly story about a customer who tried to pay with buttons because he'd forgotten his wallet. Eric watched from a distance. Something inside him loosened, but peace never lasts long when truth is still settling. That evening, Eric's phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. This is Sharon Kiptu's attorney, the voice said. Ms. Kiptu would like to make a statement, publicly. She's naming you. Eric closed his eyes. What kind of statement? She claims emotional neglect? The attorney replied. She says she was driven to desperation. Eric ended the call without responding. Mama Zanelli, who had been listening quietly, sighed. People explain their cruelty as pain, she said. It doesn't make it less cruel. Later that night, Eric sat alone on the porch. The city hummed in the distance. Naomi joined him, careful not to interrupt his thoughts. They're going to talk, Eric said without looking at her. They'll say things. About me. About John. Naomi nodded. They already are. Eric finally turned to her. Does it bother you? Naomi considered the question. It did. At first. Then I realized truth doesn't need permission to exist. Eric smiled faintly. You're stronger than you look. Naomi met his gaze. So are you. You just forgot. The next morning, headlines began to circulate. Fiancée claims emotional abuse after poisoning accusation. Was the millionaire blind to his own role? Eric read none of it. He focused on John. But John, despite his age, felt the tension. Dad, he asked quietly during breakfast, did I cause trouble? Eric froze. Why would you think that John stared at his cereal? People argue because of me. Eric set his cup down and knelt beside his son. Listen to me, he said firmly. Adults make choices. You are not responsible for them. Ever. John nodded, but his eyes searched Eric's face for certainty. That afternoon, Inspector Kojo Mensah visited. I wanted to update you, Kojo said. The defense is attempting to shift the narrative. Eric sighed. I expected that. They may request a psychological evaluation. Kojo continued. And they may call witnesses. Will Naomi be called? Eric asked. Kojo hesitated. Possibly. Naomi, who stood nearby, straightened. If I'm needed, I'll testify. Eric turned sharply. You don't have to. Naomi met his eyes. I chose the truth once. I won't abandon it now. Kojo nodded respectfully. That courage matters. After Kojo left, Eric paced the living room. "This is getting bigger," he said. "I wanted to protect you from all of this." Naomi smiled gently. Protection isn't always hiding. Sometimes it's standing still while the storm passes. Eric stopped pacing. That night, Eric dreamed of the restaurant again, but this time the sound was different. Not the scream, not the crash. Laughter. John's laughter. He woke up with tears in his eyes. The following day, Sharon's statement was released. She spoke of loneliness, of being overshadowed by a child, of fear of abandonment. She never denied her actions outright, but she framed them as a moment of weakness, not malice. Public opinion split. Some believed her, some condemned her, many were confused. Eric felt none of the confusion. He saw the truth clearly now. Love that demands harm is not love. Pain that justifies cruelty is not pain, it's entitlement. Mama Zanele spoke to him quietly that evening. "You are grieving more than one loss," she said, "not just a relationship, but the illusion that you could replace what was lost without healing." Eric nodded. "I thought building something new would erase the past." Mama Zanele shook her head. "Only honesty does that." Later, Eric found Naomi in the kitchen washing dishes. "You don't have to do that," he said. Naomi smiled. "It helps me think." Eric leaned against the counter. "After the trial, after all this, what do you want?" Naomi paused, considering. "I want to keep my voice and my peace." Eric nodded. "I can respect that." John wandered in, rubbing his eyes. "Can we watch a movie?" Eric smiled. "Of course." They sat together on the couch, John in the middle, blanket pulled up to his chin. Naomi sat on one end, Eric on the other. For a brief quiet moment the world softened. But beyond the walls the case moved forward. The questions sharpened. The truth prepared to stand in open light. And Eric understood something he hadn't before. The hardest part wasn't surviving the crisis. It was living honestly after it, without denial, without distraction, and without fear of what the truth might take away. Because sometimes what it takes away was never safe to hold in the first place. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and old paper, quiet, restrained, and heavy with expectation. Eric Dlamini sat in the front row, his posture straight but his hands clenched together so tightly his knuckles had gone white. He wore a simple dark suit, nothing that suggested power or wealth. Today, he didn't want to look like a millionaire. He wanted to look like a father. John wasn't there. Eric had made that decision carefully. No child should sit in a room where adults dissect his pain like evidence. Mama Zanele stayed with John at home, promising to keep the television off and the windows open. "Fresh air helps the heart," she had said. Naomi Afolayan sat several rows behind Eric, her back straight, her face calm but pale. She had barely slept the night before. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined herself standing at the witness box, her voice failing her, the truth slipping through trembling fingers. "Speak clearly," she told herself. "Speak honestly." Across the room, Sharon Kiptu entered with her legal team. Eric felt it immediately, the shift in the air. Sharon looked smaller than she had in the hospital, her confidence dulled, her eyes shadowed. But when she glanced at Eric, there was still something sharp there. Not remorse, defiance. The judge entered. Everyone rose. Proceedings began slowly, formally. Dates, names, charges read aloud in flat tones that felt too calm for what they represented. Then came Sharon's statement. Her lawyer guided her gently, framing her words like fragile glass. She felt isolated, the lawyer said, emotionally neglected, constantly reminded that she would never be first. Sharon nodded, eyes glistening. "I loved Eric," she said softly, "but I felt invisible. Everything was always about the child." Eric stared straight ahead, his jaw tight. When Sharon spoke of a moment of weakness, Eric felt something inside him harden, not into anger, but clarity. This was the version of events she wanted the world to believe. Then it was Naomi's turn. The clerk called her name. Naomi stood. Her legs felt heavy as she walked forward, but her steps were steady. She placed her hand on the stand, took the oath, and sat. For a moment, she said nothing. The courtroom waited. Naomi lifted her head and spoke. "I was the waitress assigned to their table that night," she began. Her voice was soft but clear. "I had no reason to pay special attention to them until I noticed something wasn't right." She described the evening carefully, precisely. The posture, the glances, the movement of Sharon's hand. The defense attorney leaned forward. "You didn't actually see the substance, did you?" "No," Naomi replied honestly. "I saw the action, and then I saw the result. So you assumed the attorney pressed. Naomi shook her head. I observed. A murmur rippled through the room. The attorney tried again. Isn't it true that you hesitated, that you doubted yourself? Yes, Naomi said, because accusing a guest like that could cost me my job. Yet you still spoke. Yes. Why? Naomi paused. She glanced briefly toward Eric, then away. Because a child was in danger, she said. And silence would have been worse. The courtroom fell still. The judge nodded slowly. Eric felt his chest tighten, not with fear, but with something like relief. The truth didn't need decoration. It stood on its own. The defense shifted tactics. They questioned Naomi's motives, suggested jealousy, implied a desire for attention. Naomi didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. I didn't gain anything from speaking, she said quietly. I lost sleep. I lost peace. But I kept my conscience. When Naomi stepped down, her legs nearly gave way. Eric stood instinctively, catching her elbow. Thank you, he whispered. Naomi nodded, her eyes shining. Then the footage was played. The screen flickered. Grainy images filled the room. Sharon's hand, the bag, the plate. No commentary, no narration, just truth. Sharon looked away. Her lawyer objected, argued context, intention, interpretation. But the image lingered in everyone's mind. Eric felt something release inside him, not satisfaction, but finality. After hours of testimony, the judge called for a recess. Outside, reporters gathered like birds waiting for crumbs. Cameras flashed, microphones stretched forward. Eric walked past them without stopping. Naomi hesitated, but then followed. In the quiet hallway, she leaned against the wall, breathing deeply. I thought I would break, she admitted. You didn't, Eric said. You were unbreakable. Naomi smiled faintly. I don't feel that way. Strength rarely does, Mama Zanelli said, appearing beside them. When court resumed closing, statements were brief. Sharon spoke once more. I never wanted this, she said, tears falling freely now. I lost myself. The judge listened carefully. Then judgment was passed. The words were formal, measured, clear, guilty. Sharon Kiptoo was taken into custody, her face pale, her shoulders sagging. As she passed Eric, she stopped. I loved you, she whispered. Eric looked at her, not with hatred, not with triumph. I loved who I thought you were, he replied. She lowered her eyes. Outside the courthouse, the world waited. Eric stepped into the sunlight, squinting slightly. The air felt different, lighter but sharper. Naomi stood beside him. What now, she asked. Eric thought of John, of Mama Zanelli, of quiet mornings and honest conversations. Now he said slowly, we heal. As they walked away together, not as anything defined, not as anything promised, Eric knew the hardest chapter was over, but the most important one was just beginning. Healing did not arrive with applause. It came quietly in small, uneven steps, like learning to walk again after a fall. The morning after the verdict, Eric Dlamini woke before sunrise. The house was silent except for distant birds and the soft hum of the refrigerator. For the first time in weeks, there was no court date to prepare for, no statement to give, no evidence to relive. And yet his chest felt heavier than it had in the courtroom. He stood at the window for a long time, watching light spill slowly across the garden. Justice had been served. The truth had been spoken aloud. But peace, real peace, was something else entirely. In the bedroom down the hall, John slept curled on his side, one arm wrapped around a pillow. Eric watched him quietly, noticing the way his son's breathing sometimes hitched, as if his body still remembered danger even in sleep. Dr. Thabo Mokoena's words echoed in his mind. Trauma doesn't follow a schedule. Eric sat on the edge of the bed and brushed a hand gently through John's hair. I'm here, he whispered, though John didn't wake. Later that morning, Naomi Afolayan arrived with a bag of groceries and an uncertain smile. I didn't know what to bring, she said softly. So I brought normal. Eric smiled for the first time that day. Normal sounds perfect. They worked quietly in the kitchen. Naomi washed vegetables. Eric chopped slowly, his thoughts drifting. Mama Zanelli sat at the table, shelling beans with practiced ease. You don't need to rush back to your life, Mama Zanelli said gently to Naomi. Storms leave debris. It takes time to clear. Naomi nodded. I know. John shuffled in, rubbing his eyes. When he saw Naomi, his face brightened. Good morning, he said shyly. Naomi smiled. Good morning, hero. John frowned. I'm not a hero. Naomi crouched to his level. You are. You survived something scary. That takes courage. John considered this, then nodded solemnly as if accepting a serious responsibility. After breakfast, Eric took John for a walk in the garden. They moved slowly, careful not to push. John kicked at fallen leaves, watching them scatter. "Dad," he asked suddenly, "are we a family?" Eric stopped. "Yes," he said carefully, "you and me, and Grandma." John hesitated, and Naomi, Eric looked at him. "What do you think?" John shrugged. "She makes things feel calm." Eric smiled softly. "Then she can be part of our calm." That afternoon, Eric met with his assistant Sibusiso Kumalo via video call. "I'm stepping back for a while," Eric said plainly. "No major deals, no expansion talks." Sibusiso blinked. "For how long?" "As long as it takes." Eric replied, "The company can wait. My son can't." After the call ended, Eric felt something unexpected, not fear but relief. He had spent years proving his worth through productivity, through growth, through numbers on screens. Now, he was learning a different measure. That evening, Naomi prepared to leave. "I don't want to overstay," she said, standing near the door. Eric hesitated. "You're not over anything." Naomi smiled gently. "Still, boundaries matter." Eric nodded. "They do." As she stepped outside, Eric followed. "Naomi?" he said quietly. "I want to be clear about something." She turned. "I'm grateful," he continued. "Deeply, but I don't want that gratitude to trap you into anything. You don't owe us your presence." Naomi met his gaze, steady and kind. "I know. I'm here because I choose to be." That answer stayed with him long after she left. Over the next weeks, life settled into a fragile rhythm. John returned to school part-time. He had nightmares sometimes. Eric learned to sit with him through them, without rushing the comfort, without dismissing the fear. Mama Zanelli taught John how to plant seedlings. "Growth takes patience," she told him. "Even the strongest tree starts small." Naomi visited often, but never intrusively. She helped John with reading. She listened more than she spoke. She didn't try to replace anyone. And that was exactly why she belonged. One evening, as Eric and Naomi sat on the porch watching the sky darken, Eric spoke what had been sitting in his chest for days. "I don't trust easily anymore," he said. Naomi nodded. "Neither do I. I don't want to confuse stability with silence again," he continued. "Or kindness with convenience." Naomi looked at him thoughtfully. "Then don't." Eric laughed quietly. "You make it sound simple." "It's not," she said, "but it's honest." He turned to her. "I'm not ready for promises." Naomi smiled softly. "I'm not asking for any." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that didn't demand anything. Inside, John watched them through the window, then turned back to his drawing. He picked up a green crayon and added a small figure beside his and his father's. That night, Eric tucked John into bed. "Dad." John asked sleepily, "Are bad things over?" Eric thought carefully. "Some bad things are. Others come and go, but we face them together." John nodded. "Okay." As Eric turned off the light, he realized something fundamental had shifted. He no longer needed a perfect picture of family. He needed honesty, presence, safety. And those things were not loud. They were built quietly, day by day, by people who chose to stay, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. The first real test of healing came without warning. It arrived disguised as an ordinary afternoon. John had been back at school for 2 weeks when the call came. Eric was in the garden trimming overgrown branches, trying to keep his hands busy while his mind slowly learned how to rest. His phone rang. Mr. Dlamini, the school administrator, said carefully, "John had a panic episode today." Eric dropped the shears. "I'm on my way," he said, already moving. By the time he arrived, John was sitting in a quiet office, knees pulled to his chest, eyes wide and unfocused. A teacher knelt beside him, speaking softly. Eric knelt immediately. "John," he said gently, "it's Dad." John's breathing hitched. He clung to Eric's jacket, shaking. "They were laughing," he whispered. They said my dad's fiancée poisoned me." Eric closed his eyes briefly. So the world had reached his son. He lifted John into his arms without a word and carried him outside. He didn't scold the school. He didn't demand names. Right now, only one thing mattered: safety. At home, Mama Zanelli brewed tea while Naomi sat quietly beside John, not touching him, just being present. "You're safe," Naomi said softly when John finally looked up. "Nothing bad is happening right now." John nodded slowly, his breathing easing. That night, Eric lay awake long after everyone slept. He realized then that justice in court did not end consequences in life. Words traveled, stories mutated, children repeated what adults whispered, and shielding John forever was impossible. So the next morning, Eric did something he had avoided his entire life. He asked for help. He contacted a child therapist recommended by Dr. Mokoena. He sat through the first session beside John, listening as his son struggled to name feelings too big for his age. Fear, confusion, shame. "Why are they talking about me?" John asked. The therapist smiled gently. "Because adults don't always know how to protect children with their words." Eric felt his chest tighten. After the session, as they walked back to the car, John held Eric's hand more tightly than usual. "Dad," he said, "you won't bring another Sharon, right?" The question was innocent, but it cut deep. Eric stopped walking. He knelt so they were eye to eye. "I promise you something," he said carefully. "No one comes into our lives again unless you feel safe. Your voice matters." John searched his face. Then he nodded. That promise changed everything. In the weeks that followed, Eric began to rebuild life deliberately. Not quickly, not impressively, but honestly. He reduced public appearances, declined interviews, redirected his company's charitable foundation toward child safety and emotional wellness, not with his name plastered everywhere, but quietly in partnership with professionals who knew what they were doing. Naomi noticed. "You're disappearing," she said one evening, half smiling. Eric shrugged. "I spent too long being visible in the wrong places." Naomi nodded. "And what about you?" Eric paused. "I'm still figuring that out." Naomi respected the answer. Meanwhile, Sharon Kiptu's sentencing made the news. The case closed officially, but commentary lingered. Some called the sentence too harsh. Others said it wasn't enough. Eric stopped reading altogether. He focused on what he could control. At-home routines formed, breakfast together, therapy appointments, evenings in the garden, small victories, John sleeping through the night, laughing freely again, asking questions without fear. One afternoon, John came home holding a drawing. It showed 3 figures holding hands, a tree behind them, the sun drawn large and bright. Eric smiled. "Who's this?" John pointed. "That's you, that's me, and that's Grandma." Eric waited. "And that's Naomi," John added, pointing to a smaller figure beside them. Eric looked up at Naomi, who stood frozen in the doorway. John glanced between them. "Is that okay?" Eric felt emotion rise unexpectedly. "Yes," he said softly. "That's okay." Later that night, Naomi prepared to leave as usual. She reached for her bag, hesitating. "Eric," she said quietly, "I need to say something." Eric nodded. "Go ahead. I care about you," she said honestly. "And I care about John, but I don't want to be a solution to pain. I don't want to fill a space that needs time." Eric listened carefully. "I respect that," he said, "and I don't want to rush into anything that costs us clarity." Naomi smiled, relieved. "Good." They stood there for a moment, 2 adults choosing restraint instead of desire, honesty instead of comfort. When Naomi left, Eric felt something surprising. Not loss, peace. Weeks turned into months. Healing didn't erase memory, but it softened its edges. John grew stronger. His laughter returned fully. His questions became curious instead of fearful. Eric changed too. He learned that love wasn't proven by grand gestures, but by listening when a small voice trembled. That protection wasn't control, but presence. That trust wasn't blind. It was built layer by layer with accountability. One evening, Mama Zanelle sat beside him on the porch. "You are a different man," she said quietly. Eric smiled faintly. "I hope a better one." She nodded. "Pain can teach, or it can harden. You chose to learn." Eric looked through the window where John and Naomi were laughing over a board game. "I almost lost everything," he said. Mama Zanelle placed a hand over his. "You almost did, but you didn't, because someone spoke up, and because you listened when it mattered." As night settled, Eric felt something settle within himself too, not the certainty of a perfect future, but the confidence that whatever came next, he would face it awake, honest and unafraid to protect what truly mattered. Time did what it always does best. It revealed what was real. 3 months passed. The seasons shifted almost unnoticed, but inside Eric Dlamini's home, something steady and deliberate was taking shape. Not perfection, not happiness without scars, but balance. John grew stronger in ways that couldn't be measured by hospital charts. He slept through the night more often. He laughed without checking faces first. He began inviting friends over again, cautious at first, then freer with each passing week. One afternoon, Eric watched from the kitchen window as John played football in the yard with two boys from school. Their laughter rang out careless and loud. Eric felt his chest tighten, not with fear this time, but gratitude. Naomi Afolayan sat at the table nearby, helping Mama Zanelli sort dried beans. "He's finding himself again," Mama Zanelli said quietly. Naomi nodded. "Children are resilient, but only when they feel safe." Eric joined them, setting down 3 cups of tea. "You helped to give him that," he said to Naomi. She shook her head gently. "You did." Eric considered that. "I learned how to." That evening, as the boys left and quiet returned, John lingered in the living room instead of heading to bed. "Dad," he said hesitantly. Eric looked up. "Yes. Can I ask you something? And you promise not to be mad." Eric smiled softly. "I promise." John fidgeted with his fingers. If Naomi wasn't here anymore, would everything break again? The question landed heavier than Eric expected. He sat beside John and took his time before answering. "No," he said finally. "Nothing would break. Because what keeps us safe isn't one person, it's how we take care of each other." John nodded slowly. "But I like when she's here." Eric smiled. "So do I." Later that night, Eric found Naomi on the porch staring out at the quiet street. "You okay?" he asked. Naomi exhaled slowly. "I was thinking. That usually means something important." She smiled faintly. "I've been offered a new position." Eric straightened slightly. "We're a training program," she said. "Hospitality management. It's a big step." "That's incredible," Eric said immediately. Naomi searched his face. "You're not disappointed?" Eric shook his head. "Why would I be?" "Because it means change," she admitted. "Less time here." Eric considered that carefully. "Change isn't loss," he said. "It's movement." Naomi's shoulders relaxed. "I was hoping you'd say that." They sat quietly for a moment. "I'm proud of you," Eric added. "You earned this." Naomi smiled, eyes shining. "Thank you." The next morning, Eric did something that surprised even himself. He invited Naomi to breakfast alone. Mama Zanelli took John out early, sensing what was unfolding and choosing wisdom over curiosity. The kitchen felt different without the usual movement. "I want to say something clearly," Eric began, setting down his cup. "Without pressure. Without expectation." Naomi listened attentively. "I care about you," he said. "But more importantly, I respect you. And I don't want either of us to confuse gratitude with obligation." Naomi nodded. "I don't want that either. I'm not asking for a future," Eric continued. "I'm asking for honesty in the present." Naomi met his gaze. "Then let's be honest." She took a breath. "I care about you too, but I won't build something on trauma. I won't rush healing." Eric smiled, not disappointed but relieved. "Neither will I." They shared a quiet laugh. Later that week, Eric attended John's therapy session alone at the therapist's suggestion. "What are you afraid of now?" the therapist asked him. Eric didn't answer immediately. "That I'll fail again," he said finally. "That I'll misjudge people. That I'll miss the signs." The therapist nodded. "Fear can sharpen awareness or paralyze it. Which one do you choose?" Eric exhaled. Awareness. That choice guided him in the days that followed. When business partners pushed for his full return, he set boundaries. When journalists requested interviews, he declined politely. When well-meaning friends suggested he move on already, he smiled and changed the subject. He no longer measured his life by speed. One afternoon, Eric returned home to find John and Naomi sitting on the floor surrounded by papers and colored pencils. "What's all this?" Eric asked. John looked up excitedly. "It's a plan?" Naomi laughed, a very serious one. John held up a drawing. "It's a house where people help kids when they're scared." Eric's heart skipped. "Tell me more." John spoke earnestly. "There's games, and quiet rooms, and people who listen." Naomi added softly. "He's been thinking about it for days." Eric knelt beside them. "That's a beautiful idea." John looked hopeful. "Do you think it could be real?" Eric didn't hesitate. Yes, not because he had money, but because he had learned how much listening mattered. That night, Mama Zanelli sat beside Eric on the couch. "You see," she said, "pain has become purpose." Eric nodded. I didn't expect that. No one ever does, she replied. That's why it's powerful. As Naomi prepared to leave, she paused at the door. I'll be starting the program next month, she said. I wanted you to hear it from me first. Eric smiled. I'm glad you told me. She hesitated. I don't want distance to turn into silence. Eric met her eyes. It won't. Not if we keep choosing honesty. She nodded. John hugged her tightly. You're still coming back, right? Naomi smiled warmly. Always. As the door closed behind her, Eric stood quietly in the living room, watching the place where fear had once ruled, now filled with calm. He realized something then. Healing wasn't about returning to who you were before. It was about becoming someone new, someone wiser, slower, more deliberate. Someone who didn't ignore the quiet warnings, someone who listened when a child spoke, someone who understood that love was not proven by possession, but by protection. And as Eric turned off the lights and headed to bed, he felt for the first time since the accident, not fear of the future, but trust in the way he would face it. The morning Naomi Afolayan left for her training program, the house felt unusually quiet, not empty, just aware. Eric Dlamini stood by the gate as Naomi placed her small suitcase into the taxi. She hadn't brought much. Naomi never did. She believed excess made people careless. John hovered a few steps behind Eric, his hands stuffed deep into his pockets, his face carefully neutral in a way that told Eric everything. You'll call, John asked, trying to sound casual. Naomi knelt in front of him. Every week, she promised, and you'll tell me about school and football and your drawings. John nodded, satisfied. She stood and turned to Eric. This isn't goodbye, she said. Eric smiled. I know. As the taxi pulled away, John watched until it disappeared down the road. She's brave, he said quietly. Eric nodded. Yes, she is. Life shifted again after that, not backward, not forward, but outward. Naomi's absence created space. Not a hole, but room for things to settle into their proper places. John returned fully to school. He still had difficult days, but he no longer hid them. When fear crept in, he spoke. When anger flared, he asked questions. Eric learned to sit with those moments instead of rushing to fix them. Mama Zanelli noticed the change. You're listening differently, she told Eric one evening. Eric smiled faintly. I'm trying not to interrupt. Business slowly re-entered Eric's life, but on new terms. He restructured his schedule. He delegated more. He chose projects carefully. When he traveled, he kept trips short and called home every night. For the first time, his success didn't feel like something that pulled him away from his son, but something that supported him. One afternoon, Eric received an email from Naomi. The program is intense, it read, but it feels right. I'm learning how systems work, how people are trained, how environments shape behavior. It makes me think about children, about safety, about prevention. Eric read the message twice. Then he replied simply, I'm proud of you. Tell me what you need. Weeks later, Naomi called with an idea. I don't want donations, she said firmly over the phone. I want structure, training, sustainability. Eric leaned back in his chair, listening carefully. What if we built something small? Naomi continued. Not a foundation with your name everywhere. A center for children recovering from trauma, staffed by people trained to listen. Eric felt a familiar stirring purpose, but quieter now. I know someone who would care deeply about that, he said softly. Naomi smiled through the phone. I hoped you would. They planned slowly, thoughtfully, with professionals, with boundaries. Eric involved Mama Zanelli, who insisted on community voices being heard. John listened from the doorway one evening as Eric and Naomi discussed ideas over speakerphone. Can there be a quiet room? John asked suddenly. Naomi laughed. There must be. Eric smiled. By the time Naomi returned for her first visit, the house welcomed her like an old friend. Not a missing piece, but a familiar presence. John ran to her excitement unfiltered. You came back. Naomi hugged him tightly. I said I would. Eric watched from the doorway, something warm settling in his chest. Not longing, not urgency, but appreciation. That night, after John went to bed, Eric and Naomi sat in the garden. I've changed, Eric said quietly. Naomi nodded. So have I. I don't want to go back to who I was. He continued. Even if it was easier. Naomi smiled. Easier isn't safer. They talked long into the night, not about romance, not about promises, but about values, about pacing, about what they would never compromise again, trust, voice, safety. The next months unfolded gently. The center John had imagined began to take shape, not grand, not flashy, just real. A few rooms, trained staff, clear policies. Quiet colors. Eric attended the opening quietly, standing in the back as Naomi spoke. "This place exists because someone chose to speak," Naomi said, "and because someone else chose to listen." Eric didn't clap the loudest. He didn't need to. Afterward, John tugged at his sleeve. "Dad," he whispered, "it feels good here." Eric nodded. That's how it should feel. That evening, as they returned home, Eric realized something had shifted again. Not just healed, aligned. He no longer felt the need to define relationships quickly or name the future before it arrived. He trusted the pace. Naomi didn't stay every night. She didn't step into a role she hadn't earned. She remained exactly who she was, present when needed, distant when appropriate. And that balance mattered. One quiet Sunday, Eric and John sat together on the porch watching the sky change colors. "Dad," John said thoughtfully, "do you think bad things happen to teach us?" Eric considered the question carefully. "I think bad things happen," he said, "and we choose what they teach us." John nodded. "I like what we learned." Eric smiled, pulling his son close. So did he, because what Eric had learned slowly, painfully, honestly, was that love didn't rush, healing didn't announce itself, and safety wasn't a feeling that arrived all at once. It was built, day by day, by listening, by choosing courage over convenience, and by never ignoring a quiet voice, especially when it spoke the truth. The day everything truly settled did not arrive with celebration. It came on an ordinary afternoon wrapped in sunlight and quiet decisions. Eric Dlamini stood in the small community center they had built, not grand, not impressive to the outside world. Just clean walls, soft colors, open windows, and trained people who understood one thing deeply: children needed to be heard before they could heal. John sat cross-legged on the floor in the corner, drawing quietly. He no longer needed to be watched every second. He no longer startled at sudden sounds. He still remembered, but memory no longer ruled him. Naomi Afolayan moved through the space, naturally speaking with staff, checking schedules, kneeling to listen when a child tugged her sleeve. She belonged here, not because anyone placed her here, but because she had chosen it. Eric watched from a distance, not as a rescuer, not as a savior, just as a man who had learned to step back. Mama Zanelli stood beside him, her hands clasped behind her back. "You look different," she said quietly. Eric smiled. "I feel different." She nodded. "You are no longer running." Eric thought about that. For most of his life, he had been chasing something: success, stability, control, a perfect image of family. When he lost his wife, he had chased replacement instead of healing. When Sharon entered his life, he had chased peace instead of listening. And it had nearly cost him his son. Now he wasn't chasing anything. He was choosing. Later that afternoon, John walked up to him holding a piece of paper. "It's finished," he said proudly. Eric knelt. "Let me see." The drawing showed 3 figures standing near a building with open doors. Above it, in uneven letters, John had written, "A safe place." Eric's throat tightened. "I like that name," he said softly. John smiled. "Me too." That evening, after the center closed, Eric and Naomi sat outside under the dim glow of streetlights. The air was warm, calm. "You know," Naomi said thoughtfully, "people keep asking what we are." Eric chuckled quietly. "And what do you tell them?" "I tell them the truth," she replied, "that we're 2 people who learn to listen." Eric turned to her. "Is that enough?" Naomi met his eyes. "Right now." "Yes." Eric nodded. He had learned that forcing names too soon was another way of ignoring the present, and he would not make that mistake again. John ran toward them, breathless. "Dad, Grandma says it's time to go." Eric stood, offering Naomi his hand, not as a claim, but as an invitation. She took it easily. On the drive home, John fell asleep in the back seat, his head tilted toward the window. Eric glanced at him in the mirror, then back to the road. So Naomi said gently, "What scares you now?" Eric thought for a moment. "Not listening," he said honestly. Naomi smiled. "That's a good fear to have." When they arrived home, Mama Zanelli was waiting with tea. "You did well today," she told Eric. "We all did," he replied. That night, after John was tucked into bed, Eric stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching his son sleep peacefully. No machines, no fear, just slow, steady breathing. Eric whispered a quiet promise not to fate, not to God, but to himself. I will never confuse silence with peace again. Downstairs, Naomi prepared to leave. Will I see you tomorrow? She asked. Eric smiled. If you want to. She nodded. I do. As the door closed behind her, Eric didn't feel loss. He felt gratitude. Weeks later, Eric stood before a small group of parents at the center, not as a speaker, not as a billionaire, but as a father. I didn't listen once, he said simply, and it almost destroyed everything I loved. The room was silent. I learned something the hard way, he continued. That love doesn't mean choosing who stays, it means choosing who is protected. He stepped back. He didn't need applause, because the lesson had already taken root in his home and his son, and in the quiet lives this place would touch. That evening, as Eric and John walked home hand in hand, John looked up. Dad, he asked, are we happy? Eric smiled, squeezing his son's hand gently. We're honest, he said, and that's better. John nodded thoughtfully. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Eric felt something rare settle inside him, not relief, not triumph, peace. The kind built slowly, the kind earned through pain, the kind that listens before it speaks. And he knew without doubt that no matter what the future brought, he would never ignore a quiet voice again, especially when it spoke the truth. What this story reminds us deeply and painfully is that the most dangerous threats in life don't always arrive with anger or violence. Sometimes they arrive quietly, smiling, asking to be trusted. Eric Dlamini didn't almost lose his son because he was cruel or careless. He almost lost him because he was tired, grieving, and hungry for peace. And in that hunger, he mistook silence for harmony and politeness for safety. Many of us do. This story teaches us that love without listening is incomplete, that children feel danger long before adults admit it, and that one brave voice, often the smallest, the least powerful, the most afraid, can change the outcome of an entire life. Naomi didn't have authority. She didn't have status. She didn't have protection. She only had conscience. And that was enough. Real love does not compete. Real love does not demand pain to prove loyalty. Real love protects even when it's inconvenient, even when it costs something. And healing. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing awareness over denial, honesty over comfort, and courage over fear again and again. If this story moved you, ask yourself, have you ever ignored a quiet warning in your own life, or have you ever been the one afraid to speak yet did it anyway? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your reflections in the comments. Your voice matters here. And if you believe stories like this can open hearts, protect lives, and remind us of what truly matters, please subscribe to the channel. Together, let's keep listening.